Here.
Regent Hensley.
Here.
Regent Rouse.
Here.
Regent Reiswick is absent. Regent Gipple.
Here.
Regent Jaden.
Here.
Regent Kramer.
Here.
Regent Bates is present. We have a quorum and the meeting can proceed. At this time, I want to take just a few moments to acknowledge the loss of former Regent Larry McKibben. Larry served on our board for 6 years and was a fierce advocate in particular for our students. He was a driving force behind TIER and the Tuition Task Force. He was a good friend, and he made a huge difference to our universities. We will miss him terribly and wish the very best to his family during this difficult time. So, at this time, I would like to sorry, I skipped a page. No, I didn't. Oh, right here, consent agenda, thank you. Are there items the board members would like to remove from the consent agenda for a separate vote? A motion and a second are required to approve and... Okay.
I would like to remove the item on the Center for Intellectual Freedom bylaws, please.
Okay, thank you, Chris. A motion and a second are required to approve and receive items on the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Regent Rouse, seconded by
I'll second.
Regent Gipple. Is there any discussion? Roll call. Regent Dunkel.
Yes.
Regent Kramer.
Yes.
Regent Hensley.
Yes.
Regent Rouse.
Yes.
Regent Reiswick is absent. Regent Gipple.
Yes.
Regent Jaden.
Yes.
Regent Bates votes yes. So just go on to this right here. Okay. The motion is approved. Regent Hensley has called for the Center of Intellectual Freedom bylaws to be removed from the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Regent Kramer?
Yeah, I had some concerns. We talked a little bit yesterday, but one is it's a good start on the bylaws, but I do think we want to get those right. And we want to have them right, not just for us right now, but for 10, 20, 30 years from now. And so I think structurally it does need some work. And then I saw in the code that it actually says the Center of Intellectual Freedom shall establish the bylaws and bring them to the board. So I think it'd be good to allow our first advisory council meeting, which is coming up, to have the first crack at the bylaws and then let the Board of Regents approve them after that.
Regent Hensley?
Thank you. Yes, I've had some discussion with Regent Kramer regarding that, and it has been a long process, and we have had a lot of input from various individuals, but I agree with the comment that it is important that we get them exactly right, and I'd like to make the motion that we table this to allow discussion at the advisory committee board meeting, which is scheduled for the 18th, and then we'll determine next steps at that point.
Okay.
I would second that.
Okay. Motion by Regent, did you have a comment, Regent Dunkel? No, okay. A motion's been made by Regent Hensley and seconded by Regent Kramer. We'll take a roll call vote. Regent Dunkel?
Yes.
Regent Kramer?
Yes.
Regent Hensley?
Yes.
Regent Rouse?
Yes.
Regent Gipple?
Yes.
Regent Jaden?
Yes.
Regent Bates votes yes. The bylaws are tabled. Now I would like to recognize each university president to report on recent activities at each institution. We will begin with President Winterstein.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to welcome you to Iowa State University, as well as our colleagues from the University of Iowa and the University of Northern Iowa. I appreciate the opportunity this morning to dive deeper into our efforts to operate with greater efficiency and effectiveness. Operational excellence has long been a university priority and has been embedded directly into our strategic plan and keep it at the forefront of everything that we do. At the last board meeting, I talked about our One University initiative, and this effort really began in earnest in 2019 to take a more strategic campus-wide approach to efficiency and effectiveness. And today we'll take a closer look at these efforts, including university IT, our centralized service models for finance, human resources that were implemented in conjunction with Workday. And I'll share examples from the colleges and academic units that have resulted in cost savings, avoided future expenses, and improved operational effectiveness. And I'll share a few ways in how we're helping our students save money through our efforts. So let's begin with our One IT initiatives, which is aligning technology services across campus to eliminate duplication, and we're consolidating support and maximizing economies of scale and software and infrastructure investments. This effort has already saved $370,000 in initial annual savings, and it's also making campus more secure from an IT perspective. And in 2019, we renegotiated with Cisco a savings of $700,000 that's reoccurring every year. So this process has already been making a difference financially for the university. And I learned that doing something as simple as extending the life cycle of building switches and wireless access points by just 2 years, we're saving over $400,000 a year. Now, don't ask me what that means exactly, but we can have our IT experts explain that for you. We're also doing a transition to Microsoft Teams Voice for phone service. So in most cases, physical phones have been replaced by using Teams as the telephone service. So external callers won't notice any difference, but it will save the university annually $560,000. So another way that One IT is making a tremendous amount of difference. So then in 2019, we centralized a service model for finance and human resources in conjunction with the launch of Workday service, our new enterprise management system, which you've all been hearing about for a long time. And it's resulted in measurable efficiencies. And since then, we've seen a tremendous amount of input. So going on just a little bit to my next slide. So centralized finance service has seen an increase of staff responsible. So you can see up there, they've seen an increase of 28% in transaction volume, which has been a tremendous success, actually. So the team now handles 86,000 more transactions with fewer staff. So the model originally budgeted 120 FTE, but now currently operate with only 99 FTE. And also in the division of operations and finance and facilities planning management, they're transitioning to a more cost-effective system for managing assets, maintenance and repairs. And this transition will save, as you can see, $550,000 over 5 years due to a lower cost of the new system compared to the current one. In terms of human resources, our centralized service model for human resources is also delivering significant results. It's allowed for a reduction in FTE by 30 FTEs over the past decade, and that is also the number of Workday transitions completed by HR has increased since 2021, but the time to complete those transactions has remained consistent at approximately 2 days. Hiring has become more efficient. Through streamlined processes, we reduced the time it takes to fill a professional and scientific staff position by 43 days, and merit positions are filled 12 days faster, and these improvements have resulted in more than 61,000 work hours saved. But more importantly, when we're trying to fill positions at Iowa State University, you need to move quickly. And that's what these numbers really demonstrate. In 2023, Iowa State completed a project to verify the eligibility of all dependents covered under our health plan. And as a result, the university is avoiding an estimated $447,000 annually. And that is a real avoided cost by knowing that we're only paying benefits for individuals that are eligible for those benefits. When we look at colleges and academic units, across the colleges, we can also see operations that are being assessed to be more efficient and aligned with strategic priorities. So in 2023, we brought together college instructional designers and additional supporters into a single centralized unit for online learning. And so online learning is under the direction of our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. Compared to initial estimates of the work required to make and sustain this new centralized model, we've been able to do it with 10 fewer FTEs, resulting in a savings annually of over $700,000. In the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, we implemented a centralized academic advising model to streamline duties and balance workloads and optimize resources. This resulted in an annual savings of $614,000. And every unit on campus is evaluating staffing levels to assure alignment with current needs and priorities. So for example, the School of Education strategically reduced faculty and staff positions through attrition to right size and enabled the unit to align resources with current academic and operational priorities, generating an annual savings of $500,000. The College of Design has repurposed space, and that has also made a difference in creating new ability for the college to function better as well. So continually thinking about how we use our space, how it's used for better use in teaching is another way that we can be more efficient and more effective. Now, something as simple as light bulbs can make a difference as well. So you can see the Parks Library replaced 4,700 fluorescent bulbs with LEDs, and while the savings is small, it will be a savings that'll occur annually and will show a more efficient use of energy. Well, we also want to save students money, and so we have the programs that you've heard about over the years, but the savings add up pretty significantly. The Immediate Access Program, launched in 2012, provides students with affordable course materials through a partnership with the bookstore, faculty, and publishers. And in 2024, the program transitioned to a flat rate model of $259 a semester for all required materials, saving students over $2.6 million in fiscal year 24 and saving $19 million since the program started. We also implemented an open educational resources program in collaboration with the university library, and this has saved the students nearly $3.2 million since 2019. Our Student Health Center has a new drug purchasing contract that has saved students $500,000 since fiscal year 20 on prescription drugs. And a new lab equipment placement contracts have saved more than $100,000, lowering testing costs, lab testing costs for students. So we're focused on efficiency and effectiveness every day at Iowa State University. Well, given the size and complexity of a university like Iowa State, a certain level of administrative cost is necessary. And this is measured nationally through a system, and you can see where we rank with our peers in this level of cost. The graph shows administrative costs compared to our peer institutions. We spend 11 cents on administration for every dollar spent on instruction. So we are directing our resources to where they matter most: student learning and academic excellence. We recognize that every tuition dollar and tax dollar we receive is an investment, and we're committed to using those dollars wisely. We want to deliver the greatest value to our students and all Iowans. So that is our presentation on how we look at efficiency and effectiveness at Iowa State University. This is my last presentation to the Board of Regents. So I want to just share a few comments. As I began my 9th year as president at Iowa State, I want to thank you, the members of the Board of Regents. I want to thank you for your extraordinary dedication and the service to the public education and the success of Iowa's 3 public universities. As a president, I see the countless hours, energy, and effort that every regent provides for this voluntary service. All of us in Iowa owe each of you a very sincere thanks for your deep commitment to this very important duty. My very deep thanks to each and every one of you. So thank you so very much. Thank you. Stay there.
So Wendy, you know that we won't let you have the final word. So I have something on behalf of the board I would like to read. As this will be her final board meeting before her retirement, I would like President Winterstein to come forward. See, I'm reading it. So you're, yes, please. Yeah, do you want to sit down? Yeah, so I can get the mics. I'm sorry, I couldn't stop crying. Whereas Dr. Wendy Winterstein was selected by the Iowa Board of Regents to be the 16th president of Iowa State University, effective November 20th, 2017. And whereas she is completing a nearly 50-year professional career at her alma mater, including having served as an extension associate, a professor of entomology, and in numerous administrative roles, including Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and Director of the Agriculture Experiment Station, before being named ISU's first female president. And whereas during her tenure, Iowa State has earned widespread recognition in areas of innovation, entrepreneurship, and research in higher education, having received more than $4.2 billion in external funding, and ISU earning the 2023 Entrepreneurial University of the Year for the Americans Award. And whereas, while she was president, Iowa State recorded significant increases in student outcomes, with its first-year student retention rate as well as its 6-year graduation rate significantly outperforming the national average for public universities. And whereas, under her leadership, Iowa State raised a record-breaking $1.542 billion for the Forever True for Iowa State campaign, with $500 million dedicated for student support, including more than 50,000 donor-funded scholarships. And whereas numerous major capital improvement projects on the university's campus were started or completed during her tenure, including the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, the Turkelson Industrial Engineering Building, the Student Innovation Center, the Gurdon Building expansion for the Ivy College of Business, the LeBaron Complex Project, and the ISU Kent Feed Mill and Grain Science Complex, the Robert T. Hamilton Poultry Teaching and Research Farm, the Stanley L. Ballion Teaching Research Facility, ISU Research Park Expansion, and SciTown. Now, therefore be it resolved that the Iowa Board of Regents expresses its deep gratitude to President Winterstein for expertise, dedication, and extraordinary service to the Board of Regents, Iowa State University, its students and families, and all Iowans. Please join me in a round of applause for the 16th President of Iowa State University, Wendy Winterstein. You're going to be very missed. And now I'd like to recognize President Nook for your presentation.
Thank you for the Kleenexes. These may be necessary. President Bates and members of the Board of Regents, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today and tell you a little bit about the things going on at the University of Northern Iowa. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to celebrate former Regent Larry McKibben. He's a proud UNI Panther alum, and given that today we're talking about efficiencies and effectiveness in his role in the TIER committee, he's got to be smiling down at us today as we do this, really in his honor. Larry grew up in Marshalltown and graduated from Marshalltown High School in 1965 and became a Panther immediately after that and graduated from UNI in 1970 with a political science degree. He met his wife there, Marlene, who I've only known as Marky. Both of them have been tremendous advocates for our university, for education across the state. After graduation, he received a law degree from the University of Iowa and then practiced law in Marshalltown for his entire career. He served 3 terms as a senator, state senator for the state of Iowa, served on the Board of Regents for 6 years, as mentioned earlier. And during his time, he was also a member of the Marshalltown School Board. And as a Board of Regents member, he was very active in the 2017 tuition study, which was really a monumental change for us. But his efforts in TIER, the transparency and inclusive efficiency review, was really a remarkable hallmark of his time here. He continued to champion that even after the report came out and pushing all of us to look at the efficiencies and how we can run our institutions at high quality, but as efficiently and as effectively as possible. His funeral is later today, and I will miss his smile. I'd like to say it was a quick smile, but I never saw his face without it on it. So he was always smiling, and he was a very, very proud Panther. He and Marky were on our campus often, welcoming their scholarship recipients during scholarship luncheons and things of that sort. So he will definitely be missed. So in Larry's honor today, let me tell you a little bit about some of the efficiencies that are happening here at the University of Northern Iowa. First of all, looking at academic affairs, when we think about efficiencies, we often think about operational efficiencies, and those come in finance and operations. But there are also many things that can be done in academic affairs and student life and the other areas of the university. Within academic affairs, as you heard yesterday, we have asked for the elimination of the anthropology program, and that was granted. The enrollments suggested that was the right move to make. That was part of a larger department that includes sociology and criminology, and that department is also reorganizing. Criminology is moving to political science and merging with that department. That's been extremely successful, and it was really at an agreement between the two of them to do that. Sociology is still working on where that's going to work out best on our campus. We also had another department that came to the administration. Two departments started talking to each other and then came to the administration and said, we'd like to merge our programs. Part of it was some staffing changes that were happening in that department as a staff member retired. And they realized it might be more efficient and effective if they joined another department. So the history department and the philosophy and world religions programs have reorganized and are reorganizing into a single department. It'll mean one less department head. It'll also mean one less secretary for those. But the two departments, Jose and I had a chance to meet with them just recently, and they're both, everyone in both those departments, now a single department, very excited about the opportunities of working together and the shared synergies that are there. You heard at our last meeting the reorganization of the College of Education from 5 departments down to 4, again, saving some resources there. More importantly, creating some real effectiveness amongst the faculty members that are in that particular college. This college has also put together the Degree in 3, which you heard about yesterday, a program that allows students who want to be in elementary education, in education, to be able to finish their degree in 3 years if they'll make a commitment to going 12 months out of the year. As you can see, the work of the Workforce Alignment Review Committee has been active at UNI for a long time and has resulted in some of those. I'd also point out that UNI at Iowa Community College has been a big efficiency for many of our students, meeting students where they are living, unable to move to one of the Regent institutions' communities, but be able to complete a 4-year degree in their hometowns through the online programs that we offer at UNI and the partnerships we have with the community colleges. When we think about student life, there are a few things that have happened recently in student life at the University of Northern Iowa. In particular, in housing and dining, we recently were reviewing facilities, and Campbell Hall is a residence hall on our campus. It's been around for a long time, and it had about $23 million in deferred maintenance. We were able to purchase trailside apartments for $21 million, and the $23 million in deferred maintenance in Campbell was just deferred maintenance. To be able to renovate that so that it would meet students' needs and meet what they were really looking for would have cost much, much more than just the deferred maintenance costs. So we were able to purchase the trailside apartments, and we will be taking down Campbell Hall as a way to actually better serve our students with the facilities that we have and save money in doing that. In addition to that, student life in both residential life and in recreational services has started to look at ways that they can better utilize our facilities, especially in low-use time periods. Think about summer on most college campuses. They have opened up many more camps. They have also started to work with bringing in tournaments and other youth activities from around the country to our campus as a way to generate revenue and as a way to use these facilities in off-peak times, summer breaks, things of that sort. We've worked with Girl Scouts, an organization called MOVE, and several other athletic programs, from volleyball tournaments to wrestling tournaments, utilizing our Wellness and Recreation Center, and also adding just several student camps, summer camps for area youth. I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of those this summer and work with those young people as they were on our campus, and they employ our students to help with those camps. So real efficient and effective use of our facilities on campus. Within finance and operations, we have recently moved to UNI Works, our new HR platform, and in the development and deployment of that, we looked closely at things that we might be able to do besides just implementing a new software system and the opportunities that were there. As part of that, we implemented a new travel hub and centralized all of our travel services. So instead of having each department or college handle travel, move that centrally. It means that the people that are handling travel are handling it all the time. We have seen a reduction in the number of mistakes that are made. We've seen a much more streamlined process in being able to get travel documents handled. We also centralized and created a procurement hub, which centralized these services as well, with similar results. It was back in the middle of the last decade. That sounds like a long time ago, but it was about a decade ago that we centralized our IT services during the initial tier review. And so we have that in as well. During tier review, we also implemented some changes in especially our power generation and effective use. In this chart, you can see what has happened with both our electrical usage in terms of dollars saved and our steam usage. If you sum up I call it the area under the curve. Michael pointed out to me it's the area above the curve. It's the yellow part of that graph. I'm a mathematician. I drew the curve at the top. So the yellow area is the savings, and what it shows is that our electrical usage, mostly because of peak load shaving that we have done, but also some lighting changes and building efficiencies, has been reduced by $6.1 million over that period. And our steam usage, we produce our own steam, we've saved about $10.7 million over that time. So in a 16-year period, we've saved $17 million, or a little over $1 million a year because of those changes alone. So very effective use of the facilities on our campus, the energy generation facilities on our campus. One of the outcomes of PEER was to bring procurement and contracting into collaboration with the University of Iowa and Iowa State University. The figures that you see here are simply our savings at the University of Northern Iowa because we have gone together and work on our procurement and contracting together. If you add all of those up, it comes out in 8 years to a savings of about $24 million, or approximately $3 million per year because of that alone. While we think about efficiencies and effectiveness, and we're often thinking about the ways that we save money, and oftentimes that results in some cutbacks. And I think it's important that as we think about efficiencies, we keep our eyes also on quality. Because as we take on some of these efficiencies, we must never step back on the quality of the education that we offer our students. As we finished the Our Tomorrow campaign, we started to think about what comes next, not in terms of a campaign, but what comes next for our university. What happens the day after tomorrow? We have asked every unit, we've asked the 4 divisions on our campus plus athletics to think critically about the next 10 years and to put together a 10-year revenue plan. It is easy for us to go in, easy isn't the right word. We know how to go in and make cuts in a year. They have to be done when your budget, when your revenues don't match your expenses. But it's very difficult to generate new revenue. That takes a longer planning. And so we have asked the 4 divisions to sit down and put together a 10-year revenue plan, to look out and see ways in which you can generate new revenue for your units, so that as we face budget challenges in the future, which we are expecting, we'll be able to maintain the quality of our institution, without having to make some of those cuts that would be in our future otherwise. As we look at the state revenues for this year and the coming years, and we look at where enrollments are going, it's very important that we look at the revenue picture. We'll have to look at our expense picture as well, but each of the units has taken on this task, and with the goal of, by the end of the spring semester, putting together a 10-year revenue plan, identifying new revenue sources, how large those might be and what those could be used for, and looking a little bit at their expenses, but really focusing on the revenues and how we generate new revenue. You can see what some of this has already been done. As we've added things like UNI at Iowa Community Colleges, new programs in nursing and engineering, which are recruiting new students in, the things that we've done with opening up the neighboring states rate, which opens up a new market and a new revenue stream for our university, but also the new camps and new programs within student life. All of those are ways to generate new revenue and help us continue to maintain a high-quality education under the constraints that we're seeing in appropriations and in tuition revenues. So I think it's also appropriate to take just a little bit of time as we celebrate Veterans Day here this week to recognize Carol Whitmore. Carol Whitmore has just been named the Commander-in-Chief for the Veterans of Foreign Wars in the United States. Carol grew up in Traer and is a 1973 alum of North Tama High School. Following high school, she attended Hawkeye Community College and the University of Northern Iowa. The financial constraints on her family didn't allow her to complete her degree at either of those institutions, and she joined the military in 1977. She served 36 years in the military from 1977 to 2013, and her list of honors is remarkable. She received the Legion of Merit Medal, the Bronze Star Medal, the Army Commendation Medal 6 times, Army Achievement Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, the Army Reserve Component Achievement Medal twice, National Defense Service Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal, Non-Commissioned Professional Development Ribbon 3 times, Armed Services Ribbon, Overseas Ribbon 3 times, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with M device, and Combat Action Badge. Carol is not only the first woman to ever hold the office of Commander-in-Chief of the FW, she's the first Iowan. We're very proud of her within the entire state, but we congratulate Carol on her election as the Commander-in-Chief, but more importantly, we thank her for her service to the country and her service to the people of the state of Iowa. Congratulations, Carol. With that, I want to say thank you, and in part, I want to say thank you to the Board of Regents, but I want to take a moment to say thank you to a dear colleague and Wendy. Wendy, I wish I could turn around and look at you, but these aren't enough Kleenexes. Congratulations on an outstanding career as an educator, as a scholar, and as an administrator. Thank you for your service to the students and employees of the Iowa State University, and through them to the people of the state of Iowa. Thank you for your friendship and your support as a colleague. It has been a pleasure to serve with you, and you will be missed. Congratulations again. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any questions or comments? Thank you, President Nook.
Thank you.
President Wilson, I'd like to recognize you for your remarks.
Thank you, President Bates and members of the board, for allowing me to give some information about what we've been doing at the University of Iowa. But before I begin, I'm going to start by thanking our colleague, Wendy Winterstein. I have to turn around and just look at her for a moment. She's kind of amazing. And I have to tell you, there's no way I thought I would be at a Iowa State women's basketball game last night when Iowa wasn't playing ISU. And then to go down to the locker room afterward was, I didn't have any Tiger Hawks on, so I was kind of incognito. But what I observed during that special moment was the tremendous joy, excitement, and support that Wendy receives, not every day, because I know what these jobs are like, but from a group of student athletes and a coach that just was pretty amazing and brought tears to my eyes, frankly. These jobs are not easy, and the average time for a president in the U.S. right now for universities is about 5.9 years. Who's counting? But Wendy has surpassed that time and done amazing things, and I will miss her deeply, and I'm grateful for her friendship and for the support and partnership that we've experienced over her time and my time together. So, Wendy, good on you, and thanks for allowing me to experience the locker room last night. So, all right. Well, I'm happy to present some information about what the University of Iowa has been doing around efficiencies and administrative tightness, and I want to focus a little bit on what we've done, but maybe spend more time even looking at where we're going in the future. The emphasis for us always is how can we find additional money to invest in education and research. So we're not trying to save money just for the sake of saving it. We want to plow money back into how we educate students, how we conduct research, and how we can save costs in those efforts. So a lot of my examples will be focused on that, but I do want to point out that our strategic plan, which we adopted right after I arrived at the University of Iowa, and we've updated, you've seen the update, we updated it in 2025. We went back and counted, and efficiency, effectiveness, and resource allocation is mentioned 11 times in that pretty short report. So we are laser focused on trying to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be as efficient and effective as possible. And I just pulled one example from page 10 in that report. There are many others. It's been part of our goal even before, but certainly because of TIER. You've already heard about TIER, but we continue to think about efficiencies in everything we do. This graph, I think, underscores, similar to what Wendy shared with you for ISU, our efforts to be as efficient as possible relative, in this case, to the Big Ten average. So you can see that we spend, on average, 12 cents per dollar on administrative costs, and the Big Ten average is 18 cents. So, and of course, some of our colleagues or institutions spend a lot more than that. We've been really focused from a long time ago on how do we do things more efficiently, more effective. And we like to say at Iowa that we're typically punching above our weight, but I often, when I compare the sizes of staffs and the sizes of budgets on administrative spending across the Big Ten, we are lean. And I think Wendy said hers was 11 cents per dollar and ours is 12. So we're very comparable, and we won't point out what constitutes the 18% average, but if you think that's the average, you know several institutions are spending a lot more than that to get that high of an average. So that's just to give you a sense of our peer comparisons. And as you know, we work hard. Part of our efficiency is to save costs, but it's also to think about being as lean as possible in terms of the spending that we do on the academics. So since 2021, we've just tallied, we've either closed or merged 26 different majors. That's a pretty big number in just a short amount of time, less than 5 years. You've approved all of those, so you know about them. And some of them involve closures, some of them involve mergers. This is just an example, a set of those 26. We just pulled them. We didn't emphasize any particular topic, but just to remind you of the work that we've done. We're always looking at student numbers. We spend a lot of time looking at where students are going, what they're interested in, and being as efficient as we can. Now, you might say, oh, you should be able to save a lot of money if you're closing those majors. But remember, we're not eliminating faculty in those areas. Typically, they're moving to other areas, but we are eliminating administrative costs. So the extent that 2 units might merge, you might reduce the need for administrative staff, and over the long haul, you may change the faculty numbers as well. So there's savings in these efforts, and I think they're good for students. They respond to where our students are going and what they want to do and how they want to study at a university. We also have been really efficient on the utility side, and part of that has been through the P3, frankly. We decided long ago, before I got here, that for us to be paying for all of our utilities year after year is not a very effective way, and so we entered this amazing P3 partnership, and I just share with you that administrative decision is resulting in a pretty significant payout for us every year of resources that we can devote to academics and to research in particular. But we've done a lot of work with the P3 investments. We've retained and recruited a lot of faculty that we would not have been able to do had we not entered this P3 partnership. We've jump-started research and fostered startup projects, and many of those have resulted in external grants that have brought more resources to the university. And we just brought in our new VPR, David Schwabel, who's been hard at work already mounting a large-scale grant proposal to get our faculty even more energized around big ideas and big interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary efforts to bring more money into the institution, and some of that will be supported by P3 funds. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the P3 in all of this. Last time, I think I mentioned that we have just launched a pretty big effort for the future. So, of course, we can talk about what we've done in the past, but I think it's really important to keep moving and keep thinking about how we can work in a collaborative way to be as efficient as possible. So we launched the ReSpark, which is a fancy way of saying let's look at revenues and efficiencies in our strategic plan and across our strategic plan. And I think I mentioned last time that we have now over 100 faculty and staff who are participating in this effort. They have volunteered. They want to be part of the solutions and part of how we think about going forward. It's co-chaired by Sarah Sanders, who's our Dean of Class, and by Emily Campbell. We have a team that's overseeing all of this. You're mostly interested in efficiencies today, but I want you to know they're also looking at revenue generation as well. And I think this is a really important moment to just reflect. I would say that it's hard to get 100 people, faculty and staff, who want to join efforts that look at efficiencies, and half of those people, 50 of them, are laser focused on efficiencies. But the good news is, because they want to work together on this, we're going to make faster progress, we're going to be getting a lot of great ideas, and we're going to get a lot of buy-in as we go forward. So here's some examples of things we've already done before the ReSpark, just to give you an example, as you've heard from my colleagues. Just one example. We looked at contracts around the healthcare enterprise, and we found that if we work together in medical devices, we can save a lot of money. And so recently the spine and cardiology folks got together and said, we can buy these devices together and we can save a lot of money. The health benefits, similar to what you heard from ISU, we brought in some new software, and it's allowing us to more quickly and more effectively identify dependent verification, and we're saving $2.8 million a year. Eliminating leases. You know that we're talking and thinking always about shrinking our footprint, and we've done a lot of work in the last several years. We've eliminated 41,000 square feet of property and buildings, and a lot of savings is going into that as well. So we're doing a lot of things. We've done a lot of things. Now as we go forward, these are the new ReSpark teams around efficiencies. We have one focused on academics, one focused on financial operations, one focused on HR, information technology, marketing and communications, and then we, of course, always have to have the other group that's going to look at other things that we haven't even thought about. And I'll give you one example of something that I just learned the other day that's remarkable. So you all know we have data ports everywhere in the walls, and we use them. We're glad when they work. We're happy they're there. We had one department look and realize that they had a lot of ports that weren't being used. And so they decided to turn off 60 of them in one department that were not being used at all. And they can save $12,000 a year in one department. So we're really looking at ways that most people don't even think about. You automatically think you need to upgrade all of those. Well, let's stop and look, text out who's really using these, how often they're using, and maybe we can shut off a good number of them and save some money. So that's just one example. As we go forward, here are a couple of things that the ReSpark team is working on. More of a hub and spoke model in marketing and communications, in HR and information technology. That will allow us to be more efficient, to make sure we have a centralized unit, but that we're really connected to all the units that are relying on those opportunities. And those are sometimes difficult conversations, but in the end, what we want to promise people is you're going to get better quality and better service to the extent that we're networked and connected. We're also looking at heating and cooling across our buildings. Nobody checks that. Sometimes it's too cold, sometimes it's too hot. How can we regulate that? How can we measure it? And how can we be more effective over time? And maybe we don't need to be doing everything at night and on the weekends that we're doing during the week. So that's another effort. And we recently have begun to do a social media audit. So we spend a lot of money on social media and time, more importantly. We have almost every unit seems to have a social media platform, and they're putting out messages and they're paying somebody to do all this. And so we're going to bring in a team to look at, is our messaging consistent? How many followers do we have on each of these? Could we be more effective in integrating and connecting? And then I think once we do that, we're going to look at all these publications that we put out. I get stacks of them from every department under the sun on our campus, and I wonder who's reading these, and are we paying a lot in printing, and can we be more effective in how we communicate? So those are just a couple of examples of things we're working on as we go forward. I would say we're in the storming phase of the Respark right now. The groups are still just meeting. They've only been at it 3 months. But one thing we've realized is that maybe we need a team just looking at transaction costs. So the number of transactions that we engage in on a daily basis around travel, purchasing, all the things we do, is there a way we could be more efficient even on that? So we may have a spin-off group just looking at transactions, and we're telling these teams, be creative. There's no formal structure. If you decide that you want to work together on something or spin something off, the only thing I've asked our provost to do is give me a map so I don't lose track of all the different teams that are working, because we want it to be as creative as possible, but eventually we have to move from the storming to the norming, and I know we're going to get there. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity to give you an overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are.
Are there any questions or comments for President Wilson? I'd like to thank all three of you for bringing your reports today at the request of the board. It certainly shows that things have been being done, are currently being done, and that you have good ideas from this day forward. And I think a lot of it is just putting it all together so that we see it, not, it's piecemeal here and there throughout our meetings. We only meet so often, so I appreciate all the work that you put into it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we all know that our fellow regent, who is no longer regent, David Barker, is busy in Washington, D.C., and he is unable to be here, but I'd like to read a resolution for him. Whereas Dr. David Barker was appointed to the Board of Regents by Governor Kim Reynolds for a term beginning May 1, 2019, and was reappointed to the board for another 6-year term on March 12, 2025. And whereas he has been confirmed to serve as the Assistant Secretary of Post-Secondary Education for the United States Department of Education, and has left the board to assume that vital role for the federal government. And whereas he served on numerous Board of Regents committees, task force, and working groups, including in leadership roles, and was always willing to take on additional responsibilities when asked, offering his thoughtful perspective to address whatever issue was at hand. And whereas, over his long and distinguished career, he has served as an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, as well as being an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago and the University of Iowa, teaching real estate investment, urban economics, and corporate finance, and has had numerous research articles published in academic journals. And whereas his knowledge, passion, and dedicated toward topics related to higher education was a huge asset, and he was willing to ask important, probing questions on issues facing the Regent enterprise, and was always searching for the best solution on any matter. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Iowa Board of Regents expresses its deep gratitude to Regent Barker for his expertise and dedication, and publicly acknowledges him for his extraordinary service and contributions to the Board of Regents, its institutions, students, families, and all Iowans. And let me say thank you to Regent Barker for all his efforts over the years, and good luck in this new role. I think at this time, let's take a 10, 15-minute break. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Board Chief Academic Officer Rachel Boone and Board Associate Chief Academic Officer Jason Pontius.
Thank you, President Bates. We are glad to present to you today the Workforce Alignment Review. This report is in your docket. It's something that a lot of us have worked on for quite some time, so we're pleased to talk with you about it today. I'll go back first to where it started with the charge. At the end of February, President Bates, you charged us to do this work with sort of these three objectives in it, as well as an objective of coming forward with some recommendations. So this report is really responsive to that charge you made back in February. We want to be clear, though, first about why this matters. There's a lot of discussion out here as well as out broadly about the value of college degrees, about the cost of college, about the connection between institutions and their communities and the workforce. Much of this is based on national data. Much of what we see and hear in the discourse is based on national data. So this is an opportunity for us to really not dismiss those claims, but really interrogate them locally and look at our own data and see what we can learn about our own context and our own sort of situation here. So I'm going to let Jason kind of dive into some background context.
This report from Gallup, I think, best represents some of the driving force behind the need for this work. Over the last 10 years, the number of Americans who show quite a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher education has been declining. On the positive side, for us, I suppose, but not for the United States in general, the institutions overall have shown a great deal of kind of decline in overall confidence. We're actually closer to the top when you look at these kind of top 17 U.S. institutions, just behind small businesses, the military, and the police. If you dig into that Gallup poll a little bit further, you kind of get at the two driving forces behind that lack of confidence, because they were asked what would make Americans more confident in higher education. And the first being kind of a focus on kind of the practical teaching, making kind of a better linkages to career, and the second being lower costs, making college more affordable. On the first part, our universities do a great deal of work already, but as part of this report, we're trying to do a better job of connecting the dots and also finding ways that we can improve over time. We're always looking to improve. And the other, as far as looking at some of the cost and affordability, there's also a chance for us to make some conversation between the gap between reality and perception. And one of the examples I like to use is I had a conversation recently with my brother-in-law. My niece is a junior at Ankeny Centennial. She's interested in healthcare fields, was looking to go to the University of Iowa. And he pulled me aside recently and said, "So what does it cost these days? It's like $40,000 plus?" I'm like, no. If my brother-in-law lived out of state, that would actually be closer to the estimate. But I want to kind of take this opportunity, we've talked about these before, but looking at out-of-state cost of attendance at our public universities and the recent trends, but then also looking at the blue line below for in-state cost of attendance. And then further below that, the red line of net price. And net price, as you know, is that kind of cost of attendance minus all the average scholarships and grants that a student receives. So in this case, my niece is probably going to be paying about half of that, and maybe with some additional scholarships, even less. Now, I focus a little bit on net price here because we're going to talk about it later, because net price is kind of one of the core components when we look at return on investment. Now, there's no doubt that the costs are going up. Inflation is driving a lot of these costs, and you can see that these tuition numbers have gone up over time. But as part of this section of providing context, I also want to show you the cost of a new vehicle during the same time frame has gone from about $30,000 to about $50,000. This is also the car industry's response to inflationary pressures. But we're all dealing with these same pressures, and we're all doing our best to try to keep those prices as low as we can.
So I want to talk a little bit about the process of this report. There was a lot to that. There's a human part of the process and a technical part of the process. Both of them were really critical. And to some extent, the processes that we undertook, in my mind, were more important than some of the outcomes that you're going to see here today, the product, the dashboards, those sorts of things. And I say that because I think this is actually kind of a concept in computing that I think is really interesting. Programs in computing are a static thing, but the process is the active part of it. And I think we have something sort of static here. We've created some reports, some dashboards, some outcomes. The dynamic process of now using those is actually going to be, and creating them first actually was a really important part of the process. And now the dynamic part of how we use them is going to be really important. So I'm excited to show you what we've created, our products here, but I also want to make sure that we don't forget to emphasize the dynamic process involved in this. So we had a team. In the report, there's an appendix that lists the sort of 12 or 13 people that Jason and I worked with really directly over the last 7 months, but it was way broader than that. We had provosts and other leaders. We had a lot of data-focused folks on assessment and institutional research. Deans took a lot of time talking and looking at some of this. Our Council of Provosts engaged with this in certain ways as well. So the process that we have was strengthened because a lot of people were involved in these really active conversations about workforce alignment, about how are we making sure that our students are in programs that are aligning with the needs of our state. Our process also included engaging with a lot of external folks. We got a lot of input along the way. I want to highlight Iowa Workforce Development here. They were really important partners for us in terms of where we got data. And not only that, they gave us a lot of guidance. Our colleagues in the Labor Market Information Division there gave us a lot of guidance on not only where to find the data, what it means, how they gather it. All of that was really important. So much appreciation to our IWD colleagues for that. We also engaged with the Iowa Business Council and the Business Education Alliance team for that. I will say with a little bit of chagrin, actually, too. We got fabulous input from a lot of those folks, but I will say, unfortunately, to the point we were so out there trying to get their input that President Nook, for example, learned some things. During one of those meetings, he saw some of his own data for the first time, along with a lot of other business leaders. And I think that was okay because we had a lot of really positive, good things to say about it, but we were so intent on getting that external feedback. We kind of got out ahead of our presidents once in a while. So apologies for that. Thank you. They also, though, did help us think about what challenges they're experiencing in the hiring process, in finding the skills and what they're looking for in their labor force. And again, to sort of in the context Jason shared with you, this is a national conversation. And so we took advantage of the fact that there are a lot of really great colleagues and experts nationally working on this. So the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce, Jason in particular spent a lot of time talking with their researchers and their experts. They've done a lot of work developing ROI models for national purposes. They do a lot of incredible work with different kinds of labor market information. That was extremely valuable for us. And again, a lot of other states and higher education systems are engaging in this work as well. So the Post-Secondary Employment Outcomes Coalition, of which we are a member, the Iowa Department of Education is also a member, as well as folks in about 40 other states. There are a lot of higher education and labor market experts that are part of that coalition. And so we spend a lot of time also engaging with those colleagues, getting feedback on what we were doing and finding out what they were doing so that it could inform our process here. And I do want to make sure you understand that we've done that over these last 7 months, but that's not the only way that external feedback informs a lot about how we connect our programs to workforce. You can't read this, but there's a list in the appendix of the report that shows the dozens and dozens and dozens of external advisory boards that serve our academic programs. And I'll add, you heard yesterday from the Career Services Director at the University of Northern Iowa about his own external advisory board, and I know that that's true at all the universities. So there's my point being, there's an enormous amount of external feedback coming in on how are we helping prepare our students to go into the workforce. Turn it back to Jason.
So we knew going into this that trust in higher education is not particularly high right now. And so that really helped frame our guiding principles at the beginning of this whole process. So we established a few things. One is that we were going to use publicly available data. There might be a temptation for someone to say, oh, well, the universities are just going to make up their own data or put their own spin on whatever they've got internally, have a black box. We wanted this to be the same data that anybody else can access. We wanted to create methodologies that were transparent and repeatable, but also use a lot of those methodologies that external sources were already using. We're not making up our own formula in the process. We're just adopting what other folks have used. And then we're working really hard to make direct connections between our university graduates and the workforce data sources that we have available, which is, as I'll talk about, not as easy as it sounds. The crux to this whole process is trying to figure out a way of connecting a major to an occupation. We've got great data sources on earnings by major, industries by major. On the other hand, there's amazing resources like both in the state and nationally on occupation projections, kind of salaries that are available out there. But connecting the two together is incredibly difficult. You would think it would be easy just to say, look, just get a bunch of your majors, your graduates, look at their earnings, and figure out what occupations they're in. That connection doesn't exist. As Robert Frederick with the Career Services presentation yesterday talked about, the gold standard in a lot of this earnings data that we use with the U.S. Census Bureau uses unemployment insurance wage data. Now, the unemployment insurance was designed not for this kind of work, but it has industry that the person's working in, but not the occupation. There are a few states that have been able to make that work, to try to add occupation to their unemployment insurance, and so they can get at some of this better than we can. But most states, including Iowa, don't have that connection. So what we decided to do is go for the next best thing. There is a SIP to SOC crosswalk, SIP being the kind of identifying number for majors that's standard across the United States, and the SOC code, which is a similar kind of a, standard identifier for occupations in the United States. Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out this crosswalk, and we use that in order to make a connection between our SIPs for our majors and the SOC that is used for making all these different kinds of projections for jobs going forward. Now, this is not a perfect crosswalk, and in some cases, as we went through it, we learned that there was respectfully a lack of creativity on some of the combinations. For example, a major or a degree in religious studies had no connection to an occupation in the clergy. There was a connection between getting a degree in mechanical engineering and being a mechanical engineer. There was not a connection between getting a degree in chemical engineering and being a chemical engineer. There just wasn't there. So we made a few common sense connections using the American Community Survey, which is put out by the U.S. Census Bureau. They don't list degrees, but they do list degree fields. And so we were able to look up for the state of Iowa, for folks that are graduating with these degree fields, what are some of the top occupations? So we made a few changes to kind of fill in the gaps. Again, common sense changes that are transparent, and I can share them with anybody who'd like to see them. Once we had made that connection, we were starting to bring some of these different data sources together. The first is, you've seen this before, this is our census PSEO data showing 20 years of our graduates and the kind of earnings that they can expect to have 1, 5, and 10 years after graduating. We grouped all of these pages that are through the website, through the dashboard, under 4-digit zip codes. So you can see the 4-digit 2705 for statistics. And then under that, you might have a 6-digit zip code, which might be a little bit different in those last 2 digits. In this case, there is no difference. The 4-digit represents the exact major in all these cases. In addition, again, you've seen this, we were able to get really good industry data from across the United States, so we can see where those statistics graduates are working in Iowa industries, but also in the US industries, and see where those differ. This is where the SIP to SOC really kind of shows its power. We are able to look at Bureau of Labor Statistics projections for job openings in the United States, the expected growth, the median salaries, and the equivalent data that the Iowa Workforce Development puts together for the state of Iowa. So we can then take, in this case, looking at religion and religious studies, what are some of the expected occupations for those majors, and then also see where there's expected job openings and projected growth, not only in Iowa and the United States. We're also showing this at different levels of education. So in this case, you can see bachelor's and doctoral. This is another example where the SIP to SOC is not terribly creative. It tends to, when it can't think of anything else, just to say post-secondary teacher in this particular topic, but that's what we have here. In addition, we were able to bring in some other data from Bureau of Labor Statistics and from Iowa Workforce Development. BLS includes associated occupations with the occupations that are already on the list. So you might have an occupation of chemical engineer, but then there are maybe a dozen or more different similar sorts of occupations that are listed. So we put that in there just to say, just chemical engineer may not really represent all the different kinds of possible job openings, and this gives you a better idea of that spread. Additionally, Workforce Development has done some really great work in looking at all these occupations and saying, okay, what are some of the skills that these occupations need? So this is also part of our dashboard. Now, during public comment yesterday, there were one of the faculty member at Iowa State pointed out some of the limitations that they saw in the report. And I didn't have a quibble with what she was saying. I mean, those are limitations not, I would say, in the report itself, but with the data that we have to work with. And again, trying to be transparent using that public data. Another big component of this report was return on investment. And there are a lot of really reputable return on investment calculations already out there. This one is FREOP, or the Foundational Research and Equal Opportunity. They have got a very complex calculation that does a really nice job of looking at earnings over time and kind of accumulated earnings during those periods, and provides counterfactual data, which is a fancy way of saying they subtract out the amount of earnings that a high school graduate going straight into the workforce would have. Georgetown Center has a very straightforward and simple calculation that kind of takes into account the fact that students are not working while they're getting their degree, takes into account the cost of education, and then looks at projected earnings after that. It does not do a counterfactual, but it's a very easy to understand formula. Education Data Initiative is another one that's looking at more of an index, kind of like comparative growth or comparative earnings over time. And then the University of Texas system has created a number of thresholds that look at things like minimum economic return, like is a student able to hit certain thresholds over certain periods of time. In this case, the minimum economic return threshold is can they earn at least as much as a high school graduate plus enough to be able to basically pay for their cost of education. We have also talked to a number of different system offices and universities about how they're calculating ROI. Everyone is doing it slightly differently, but typically the differences are because of different limitations in data. For example, University of Arkansas system does not have the ability to get census PSEO data. They are using more of their state data, but it doesn't give them as much of a picture for national earnings. And similarly, everyone's using a slightly different formula, but we're all kind of on the same track and getting there, and we've shared our methodology with them and gotten positive feedback. So there are a number of aspects going into kind of return on investment. As we talked about, net price being part of it, opportunity costs, part of that goes into time to degree. We also post-graduation earnings. And a lot of this boiled down to, after looking at all these different kinds of return on investment calculations, we found that our folks didn't resonate very well with this concept of accumulated earnings. It's like, okay, so an engineer makes $1 million more over the course of a lifetime versus someone who maybe has a degree in something else. I think the average person doesn't really parse $1 million versus 500,000 versus what is accumulated earnings. So we were gravitating more toward kind of the threshold data. Again, we wanted to keep it a fairly simple calculation so people could check our work. So we are adopting more of the University of Texas system threshold, but we put a spin on it. We actually use something that Georgetown Center was doing, is looking at basically kind of a time to break even. So that's another component of what we're looking at. So again, to stipulate, what do we mean by time to break even? It's the number of years it takes for a degree holder to surpass the earnings of a non-degree holder, factoring in the cost of education. And we're using earnings, time to degree, and debt as part of that calculation. And to operationalize that, I'm going to show you a little bit of what this is. So I'm showing years to break even by bachelor's degree. The graduate calculation is slightly different by necessity, but I'm not going to go into that today. I can talk more about that later. So in the first, we're looking at median earnings of a high school graduate who went straight into the workforce, which is about $34,000 in the state of Iowa. We then look at how long did it take them to earn the degree? So that time to degree times the net price we were talking about. So in column 1, you're looking at a net price or a cost of attendance of sorts for these students, or the cost of education for these students, of about $18,000, which would be the net price, times 4. That actually varied by degree type, because each degree type has different times to degree, which would be about $72,000. We're assuming that the student is financing at 6% interest over 10 years, $72,000, and then figuring out how much of that do they have to pay every year. So they take the cost of the amount they'd be making as a high school student, adding that amount that they have to finance, that's the threshold. Then how quickly can they exceed that threshold with the earnings that they're going to get post-graduation? Now, in this case, you see like the ones like accounting, chemical engineering, right away. In that very first year, they are exceeding that threshold. At the very bottom, there was the one that took the longest, and it was the only 1/8 year, was Ancient Civ. But I also want to point out that this assumes Ancient Civ was their first major. Now, I know from the data that we have, I think it's 18 students have it as their first major, another 36 have it as their second major. Most students are not putting this as their first. They are maybe taking something else that they know might be more marketable, but they have a great interest in ancient civilization. So this is something that they're also just adding on. We're assuming here that this is their first major when we're looking at this. Even so, a student at the age of about 29 is breaking even with those high school graduates, and then has another approximately 35, 36 years of their career to kind of earn more. Now, assuming $72,000 that you're having to finance for your education is a little bit excessive, and I think all of you know from our data from financial aid that that is not even close to what we're expecting for most of our students. So column 2 is assuming the median debt. And it's median debt for students that have debt, which is about half of our students. And that number is closer to about 30,000. So that changes the calculation quite a bit. The third column, again, is looking at, as I said, about half of our students are graduating with no debt. And this assumes that they had no debt to finance. And it also further accelerates that break-even point. We are still using that most conservative column, the very first one in our report and on the dashboard, because we felt like that was the best way to go. That was, again, it was adopting the University of Texas model for that, and conservative, in this case, being better. But we do want to show this part to you. What this means is 75% of our majors, looking at the majors by themselves, break even within 3 years. Now, a lot of the more popular majors break even more quickly. As I said, there are not a lot of students that are taking maybe astronomy or ancient civilizations. But so 81% of the students that are enrolled in a major break even within 3 years. And if we use just the median debt upon graduation, 98% of our students break even within 3 years.
So I'm going to jump back in here on this dashboard. Jason kind of talked through all the components of this so far, but I want to talk about it as a whole here for a moment. This is an image of it. There's a link to it in your docket on, I believe it's on page 8. I just want to take a moment though to recognize the amount of effort, I think what you can probably tell reflected in what he's just been describing. Incredible amount of work over the last 7 months in building this out with a lot of people's support in sort of reviewing and checking the data. So I'm grateful for that. You can sort and filter at the top of this. You know, if you were in the dynamic version of this, you could sort to the different universities. You can sort to the different programs. You see it. This is accounting at UNI. We can switch it to accounting at Iowa State. We could switch it to any number of programs at any of the 3 institutions. They're all there. And the components of this that he's described are all embedded here, as well as a few others. We have things like how many degrees are being awarded annually. We have an average number near the top. What % are going on to graduate school is in there. There are a number of things. I think there are, one of the things that you'll see reflected later in our recommendations is that there are pieces of this dashboard was built for this purpose, for this report. We have other dashboards that use parts of this already. What you see in one of the recommendations is what might be the most useful thing in the long term is to take parts of this that we think are particularly effective and embed them into other dashboards that we already have. I don't know that this particular one is the one for the big time in a sense because it's pretty dense, as you can see in front of you. There's a lot there. However, there are pieces of this that we can embed into some other ones that we already use pretty effectively and regularly. So I do want to highlight that. I also want to say that as a general rule, I mean, by the way, I do love this thing because I love to dig into this data. But I want to be clear, for me, who loves this thing, this isn't really a thing that answers all the questions I have, but what it is doing for me is helping me ask better questions. This is telling me a lot of little details that make me wonder other things about our programs or about our graduates or about our Iowa industries and what else we might be able to know. It's interesting when you can see a huge gap in year 1 earnings to year 5 earnings, but then maybe it's a little of a lower slope from year 5 to 10. Well, that makes me want to know more about what's going on in that industry. What's the difference between entry level and having some experience? What sort of career development is happening in there that makes that happen? The ones that when we see a quarter of them going on to graduate school, I want to know more about, well, what are they pursuing? Are they switching careers? Maybe they got an accounting degree, but then they went back and got a master's degree in teaching. Have they switched industries? I don't know. So this leads me to ask a lot more questions, and I hope that's one of the ways that you all can use it too, to think about all right, what else do we want to know here? Because this can help us get to some more interesting questions in my mind. So again, in your report, there's a link to the dashboard. We elected not to make an appendix with 350, I don't know. We thought about putting every single dashboard in the docket, but that would have been make the docket 400 pages longer. We didn't know that was going to be very productive for all of you. So please feel free to dig through those after the meeting and ask us questions anywhere along the way. We're going to switch gears here for a second now to the other part of the charge, which was enrollment. We were asked, this was a smaller lift. So what Jason just described, that was a lot of work that really went into that workforce alignment piece. A lot of focus. This was a little easier because we were looking internally. What is our enrollment? What are the numbers? And that's data we have. That's data the universities have. We worked with them. We spent a lot of time reviewing it to make sure we had accurate data, really making sure we were looking at the right thing, first majors, second majors, third majors, graduate degrees that are maybe joint programs, and how do you apportion it? These are complicated things. We also had a lot of conversations about the factors that go into enrollment. It's not simple as if there are programs that are low by design, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. So we had a lot of conversations also, in fact, about what's the definition of low, right? That was an important part of this. So I want to talk real quickly about some of the factors that influence how we think about enrollment. There are programs that are very high workforce demand. Nursing is a great example. It's a critical factor. It helps us understand enrollment patterns. When we know there's a high demand industry and we have a really well-aligned major like this, we expect to see some relationship there. So that's an important thing that impacts how we think about enrollment. Student interest and aptitude, right? A lot of our music majors have really robust enrollment because students who have a strong aptitude in music gravitate to them. But that's true not just in things like music, that's also true in things like math or things like creative writing, right? So it's a lot of student interest and aptitude will always drive how enrollment looks in a lot of areas. Accreditation caps. I mentioned this is actually not a very common issue, but it's a very important issue in the places where it exists, and it's especially so in some of the specialized healthcare areas. They are low, that's where we have that category of low by design. That's usually as a way to make sure it's a very high quality learning experience, to make sure there's appropriate access to the experiential learning portion of the program. So those caps are important and relevant in some instances of a program. The complication of talking about enrollment also comes when it's an area that is commonly used as a general education. So when we talk about enrollment, we can say, well, how many majors are there? And that's part of enrollment, but enrollment is also how many people are taking the courses offered in that department. Course enrollment is part of enrollment for them. That doesn't mean that they're all majoring in, here's an example, physics, right? Physics is not a huge in terms of being a first choice major. However, it is huge in terms of educating engineers and educating architects and educating teachers and educating across the board a lot of areas. So that was part of our conversation about what does low enrollment mean if they have thousands of students enrolling in their classes. Relatedly, common second and third majors, ancient civilization is an example there too, that Jason mentioned, religion. It's a lot of the same sort of conversation as related to the general education. And then there are ones that are low workforce demand, but we need the experts. And this is especially true in some of the graduate programs. The two I pulled here, agricultural meteorology, we don't necessarily need a huge number of those, but my goodness, in our state, do we need some experts in this area? We need maybe a lot more veterinarians, but egg meteorology is just as important. We just don't need so many. Orthodontics is another one, absolutely necessary profession, but the volume of that is where the conversation comes into play. So we developed the thresholds. There was a lot of conversation about what are the thresholds for what low means. We had to land somewhere. So we landed right here with undergraduate of 25 students in the major. So we took out that course enrollment part of the conversation and said 25 or less. And here you see the number of programs, and I'm already adding caveats to some of those to help understand, like, yes, some of them are new. Sometimes they take some time to build up. So if they had been created within the last 5 years, we certainly wanted to label them as new because they're still in that build-up phase. Accreditation caps are relevant. Graduate, we combined master's and doctoral together and said 10 or fewer is the threshold. You see the numbers there. Again, the new is relevant there. Phasing out is relevant there. And that's relevant on the undergraduate side too. Because when we end a major, you took action yesterday, ending a major, one major at UNI. There is a list in your appendices, and actually President Wilson mentioned how many programs have been either merged, closed, or consolidated in the last several years. It takes time to do that. So when the board takes action, the program doesn't end the next day, right? We have 19 students still in anthropology at UNI. They're going to teach those students until they graduate. So that program will keep showing up on our list for 2 or 3 years. Through that process. That's important to note. So that's where those thresholds are. Again, that's all mentioned in your report. But really, what we have to come to now is what are the recommendations. These are also in the report, and this was the final part of the charge that we received from President Bates. So workforce alignment. Jason talked a lot about this ROI, this break. We kind of started in our smaller group referring to it as our break-even calculation. I think there's a lot of good value there. And so we've talked a lot about where else could that calculation live in a place that students will see it, that families will see it, that faculty will see it, that advisors will see it, career staff will see it. So we've talked about that being an important thing. Let's find where we can have that information available that it can be most useful. That was one that everybody felt very strongly about. Supplemental data on student outcomes. We've said, Jason said, we heard yesterday, it's in the report, there are gaps in the data. We would like to spend more time finding some supplemental data to fill some of those gaps and to work with folks on doing that. There are instances where we're missing data on certain majors. Again, because of we felt it was so critical, it was a guiding principle to use as much publicly available data as we could. Sometimes that meant there wasn't a good matchup. So there were some challenges where missing or incomplete or misaligned data had to do that. This is a national challenge, so I will repeat, there are a lot of folks working on this. We're engaging with a lot of folks on that issue nationally and trying to find some solutions to that can work. And then our final workforce alignment recommendation, expanding strategies for supporting students. I could not have been more pleased yesterday with you having the report from our career services colleague at UNI, because he really set the stage to show how much they are doing. And boy, if we can take some of this information and embed it further into what the work of those professionals do all the time, that's powerful. Thinking about his 3-2-2 methodology that he described, and how are we talking about in some of the majors that maybe are identifying through this data that look like maybe there's room for improvement? Do they have the 3-2-2 embedded in there? Are they getting the leadership opportunities, the internship opportunities? I think that's a good place for us to take this information and insert it into a process. We have some good, robust processes there, but we could improve them by using some of this to help with that. Enrollment recommendations. We want to integrate these. I think one of the reports that this board receives, I believe your next opportunity with it is at the February meeting, an annual program review report. We can embed these low enrollment thresholds into that process at the board level. Again, the universities are monitoring enrollment all the time. It's an annual opportunity. It's a probably more than annual thing that they're working on. At the board level, we haven't maybe done as much of that. We can embed that into that program review process so that this board is getting more information on that front, and it becomes another element of the program review process. This framework for program vitality, I want to talk about that a little bit. It came up a lot. We talked for many months. Programs and how we evaluate them, it's a multi-dimensional process. This enrollment is a really critical dimension. But there are others, and we've talked about some of them, about the accreditation, general education, all the other pieces that go into that. So the universities, in working with the Council of Provosts and our colleagues there, have talked about how there's some good opportunity for them to collaborate on talking about what might a program vitality sort of index look like, and how would that work at the three institutions? Could they collaborate, share some ideas and thoughts, and come up with something that really works well, looking at ratios of faculty to credit hours, looking at course enrollments that I mentioned. There are many other factors that go into the program vitality. So we think that there's a really good opportunity for collaboration there among the universities. Finally, on enrollment, there probably are some additional opportunities for program reorganization, closure to consider, different efficiencies. Again, this data can help inform some of that. And I would, again, emphasize that those conversations do happen already at the institutions, which is why they get brought forward for closure to you periodically, and reorganization for you periodically. So we now have an additional layer and way that we can inform that, and that work should continue. And now for the wonky part, because you've got me and Jason here, and you're gonna get that when you've got the two of us at the table. It's pretty important to say out loud something that, again, actually our colleague yesterday who spoke at public comment mentioned this idea of how we code our programs. We found in our process inconsistencies within institutions, across institutions, at all levels, and we had a lot of good conversation about that, and that's something that I will say this particular recommendation is underway. It's happening. The institutions have really taken this up in terms of really looking more closely at the process of how we call them SIP codes. The classification of instructional program codes are assigned to each major because that impacts how we can track outcomes. We need to be able to make those connections using those, and we can do better with some cleaned up work there, and that's, I'm happy to tell you, underway. Jason explained a lot about the workforce data that we have based on unemployment insurance wage data, which is really valuable data. Again, it is only available, we can see the industry that people are working in. We don't know what they're doing. Example I often use is President Wilson and Provost Craig will talk a lot about the pharmacy graduates. They're 50% of the pharmacists in the state of Iowa, University of Iowa graduates. If they're working at Target, it shows up in our data that they work in retail. It doesn't show that they work in healthcare. It shows that they're a retail employee. That's fine. There's a lot of retail pharmacies out there, right? But it also shows that an accounting major from UNI, that's an accountant for Target, works in the retail industry. Well, the accountant and the pharmacist went through two very different academic programs, but our wage data is putting them into the same bucket there, in the retail bucket. So that's sort of a long example of saying we would like enhanced wage records. This is something that's happening in other states. There are about 15 states nationally that are enhancing wage record data with occupation information. This isn't something the Board of Regents can do. I believe it's something that we should support. I think the universities would support this as well, in working with our colleagues at Iowa Workforce Development, some of whom also support this, by the way, but it's complicated. So this is something that would help us look more at the jobs, at the occupations that people work in. That's going to be really powerful, and we can say a lot more about what our students are doing and how they're doing it. It would benefit I believe, our business community. It would benefit our economic development community. It would benefit our institutions. So it'd be good for a lot of folks. And then the last data recommendation we have is really around social and community impact. We have a lot of colleagues that we've talked to in other places that are also working on this. We found one attempt at doing something like this out of the State University system in Florida. We've initiated some conversations with some colleagues in Arizona are trying to do this. This really gets at our teachers, our early education graduates who are doing really critical work, our social workers, our community and behavioral health folks who are graduating with these degrees that we know are really important in our communities and are doing really good work in our communities, but maybe the wage outcomes are not in the same place. However, they have an enormous amount of social value and community impact, and we want to find a way, and so when we talk about program vitality, as I did earlier, that could be a factor there too. We haven't cracked that nut yet, but we want to. So I'd love a year from now if we could come and tell you about the really exciting new index we have on social and community impact of our majors. That would be a really powerful outcome to me. So our recommendation on that one is just that we proceed with trying to crack that nut, if you will. And we're here for questions. We gave you a lot of information, not only in the report, but just now. And we want to give you an opportunity to ask us questions about that.
Okay, are there any questions? Regent Dunkel.
Dang, that is good stuff. That is a lot, but wow, this is so needed in Iowa, to figure out. I'm even thinking student loan debt and how all this, at what point is it good and to a point in which we got here. Kudos, very good.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. Regent Kramer.
So I have two questions. Yeah, great work, and this is a great start of where we need to start.
Yeah.
The first question is just a clarification on that break even. I like that you're translating it to that. Explain that a little bit. So if you have the $72,000 of debt, how are you saying it's breaking even the first year? Is that just that you can handle your debt payment?
Correct.
Okay, and still
Yeah,
make
so
more money?
we're assuming that 10-year financing, and so it's looking at 1 year of payment for that 10 years. So adding that on to the high school earnings, and so that's where you get that threshold.
So the graduate is making enough to overcome both what the high school graduate would have made
Yep.
and this debt payment, and this other break, you could call that break even.
Correct.
Gotcha, okay. Second is, where do we go from here? Obviously, we don't want to get involved in which programs to cut and all that, but we want to know how can we help the universities be accountable. So, and tell me about this process. Is it a year from now that we will see those numbers of courses and maybe have responses of the universities saying, hey, we eliminated these, but this is why we'd like to keep, these, because of, some of the reasons you mentioned. Or is there something, what did you say about this February meeting that's about programming? Explain that a little bit.
So we have an annual program review report that comes to the board. I would say that report isn't going to reflect much about this because those are reviews that have been done over the past year. There could be, I haven't actually reviewed all the materials yet for that, so it could be that some of the recommendations in those materials relate to this, but that would be more of a happenstance than a by design from this outcome. In terms of how the board can help, I think this has to be a sort of an iterative developmental thing. I don't know that I could give you an answer to that today. I think highlighting which parts of this are most important to you. I mean, even the fact that you asked the question, I think is an important thing for me to take, and I'm taking note of, because I think we do want to think about, maybe there are additional changes we need to think about in the program review process that help the board get better information along the way. Or if you have other thoughts about what other information would be informative to you aside from enrollment thresholds, what else do you want to know to help you think through this process? That's helpful for us as we work with the institutions as well to guide what to bring forward to you, whether it's in February or maybe in June or a year from now. We want to make sure you're getting information you need to help set the parameters. We hope the board sets parameters so that the universities know sort of what they're shooting for.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, we want to see progress, and our stakeholders and the legislature want to see progress, from us. So they're holding, I do the air quotes, that's holding us accountable. So we want to, just see how that's being addressed and so that we have those answers.
Regent Hensley.
Thank you. Obviously we had a chance to look at all of this before, but even the presentation here, the amount of information is overwhelming, really, to digest it all. A couple of comments. The information that you shared regarding job classifications and, for example, Target, Hy-Vee, where accountants and pharmacists are going to be counted as retail. How are we going to be able to separate that? Is that going to be possible? Question number one.
So we, as in Board of Regents, aren't until the employer, the way that data comes together is through Iowa Workforce Development, and really the U.S. Department of Labor is part of the solution here too, and how they gather information from employers. So we are at this point merely a consumer of data that they're all gathering, but we can also ask them like, hey, we want to continue to sort of be encouraging them that this is going to make a difference for our industry. So for us to support making that change in how they collect data, I think is really important. Again, there are states doing this, and I want to acknowledge it's hard to do because it does put, there's technical challenges to it as well as human changes that have to happen to make that change. But Jason knows the data too. Do you have a data?
Well, I mean, just to sum up, adding the occupation code to the unemployment insurance form is really the key for all of this.
It sounds easy, it's not.
Right.
But yes.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of other questions then. Have you had? You've got recommendations in there, but in some of the conversations I've had with legislators, I think there's a feeling that there should be specific recommendations as to which programs and/or majors should be eliminated. So, can we talk about a timeline? And it kind of piggybacks on what Regent Kramer is talking about, because I do believe there is an expectation that we get there. So can you talk timeline?
Yeah, sure. And I would want to build on sort of showing, and one of the things in the report very intentionally is the ones that have been cut and eliminated in the last, I think it's a 10-year time frame in that appendix. Yeah. And then we actually need to add to that because, again, there have been additions to that even just in yesterday. But I think that the timeline in some ways might have to come with your help. To say what is the timeline by which you want and what is it you would like the university to share with you on that. We've presented what the thresholds we set were. We've shown you in this report which ones were on that. I think the next question might be that I would put towards the board is, do you have a specific request in relation to the ones that are on those lists that we've now given you? I didn't feel like it was certainly my place or Jason's place to tell the board what to do with that list of programs or to tell the universities what to do with that list of programs. We wanted to provide that to you today and actually have this conversation. So, yeah.
And you talked about the process and all the people involved.
Yep.
So
yep.
The report as it's presented today, is it fair to say that there was complete consensus with everything that's in here?
Yes. I don't. Yes, I turn and look at the provost for that. I mean, this was definitely thoroughly vetted by them. We definitely talked at length with academic leaders, as I mentioned earlier, about this. So, consensus. I guess it would depend. There might be nuanced areas of difference, but there was consensus on this is the right set of information to bring forward to the board. There's consensus on where we set those thresholds. I mean, there were consensus on a lot of pieces of this. I don't know if I want to speak for them and say there's consensus on like some specific
Yeah,
nuanced piece
I
of it, but
understand,
yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Regent Jaden.
So maybe, Rachel, to be more specific to Regent Hensley's question, I'd go back to that slide where you talked about that threshold. And I think adding that discussion to the February meeting on at least what the university's initial thoughts are on this will help address our, the legislators' questions.
Fair comment.
And I think,
Yeah.
and so then we can have a conversation, is it a financial discussion or a philosophical discussion? Those are
Yes,
two-
thank you. Yeah.
To your point about ROI. But I think adding that, not expecting the universities to have the answers
Yep.
on all this, but at least their initial thinking and plans with these.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to do that. And we work with the provost on having that conversation. I think one of the things we talked about, I can't offhand tell you what any of the programs are that are noted in those numbers there, but some of them do have a really high ROI, right? And so let's talk about that. Like maybe there are, a dozen of the programs represented here that have an exceptionally strong ROI. That's really good to know, right? So we did not, one thing we discussed here in our 7-month-long process, but didn't execute because it was already so complex, was, hey, we should actually crosshatch this low enrollment with the workforce alignment data. We didn't do that, didn't have time for that, but it's a fantastic idea, and that could be a factor too, if that makes sense to all of you and what we add to that February conversation.
Very good. Regent Rouse.
I think another component that struck me is the comment about just because there are not students majoring in that does not mean that there isn't a high number of students taking courses. So I feel like that is a very important component when looking at it. So make sure that that's also included.
I would
Yeah,
agree.
we can add that, yeah.
I would agree. Anybody else? Well, I think we have some great suggestions. I like your suggestion, Kurt. I appreciate all the work that the universities, spearheaded by you two, that you've done. You've certainly returned on our investment that we asked you to do this. I appreciate it. That being said, we also will always continue to take comments, suggestions from all of you as to where you think that this should be going. You get to a certain space and you think, I think we need to look more at this. So it needs to be a group effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll go on to the appointment of an interim president at Iowa State. A motion and a second are required to appoint David Spalding to serve as interim president of Iowa State University effective January 3rd, 2026 and continuing until March 1, 2026 or until such time as Iowa State University President-elect David Cook assumes office. Spalding will have an annual salary of $600,000. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Regent Jaden has moved and Regent Dunkel seconded, excuse me. Any discussion? We'll take a roll call vote. Regent Dunkel?
Yes.
Regent Kramer?
Yes.
Regent Hensley?
Yes.
Regent Rouse?
Yes.
Regent Gipple?
Yes.
Regent Jaden?
Yes.
Regent Bates votes yes. Motion is approved. And I don't believe David Spalding was able to be here. Not, okay. Okay, well, we're certainly grateful that he accepted this interim position, so thank you. We do not have things for closed session, so we will not have that. I don't know if all the regents know that yet. So, in that case, before we adjourn, I would like to thank Iowa State University for always hosting such a gracious time for all of us. Basketball was really, that's a new one, thank you. But thank you for everything, and again, President Winterstein, take care and we wish you the very best. That concludes the board's business. The meeting of the Iowa Board of Regents is adjourned.